about racism, anti-blackness, or violence. I will use my voice in the most uplifting way possible. And do everything in my power to educate my community. I will love my black neighbors the same as my white ones.
Greetings, it's Adam No Eve. Okay, so this is the video that a lot of people have been waiting for. Get buckled up, strap in, especially if you're a Christian. And especially not only if you're a Christian, but if you're on the politically masculine right. One of those kinds of groyper types who likes to worship Nick Fuentes and, Christ is king, Christ is king, that dumb chant. I grew up reading the Bible, so I've generally known from the beginning that Christianity is a very egalitarian religion, and that Jesus is the primordial proto-feminist. Jesus is the first feminist, I could argue, one of the first feminists in all of world history. He's founded feminism. And as radical as that sounds, that's literally true. That is the absolute truth, and I will show you right now. First, I'm going to begin with quoting a number of Bible verses that Christians will have brought forward to me and say, "No, look, Adam, Christianity is a strong, robust, patriarchal religion." Okay, if we convert everyone to Christianity, family values will be restored, and the patriarchy in Western civilization will thrive. And I'm here to tell you that is absolutely not the case, and is in fact the utter opposite. Christianity was created. Jesus was a communist. Jesus Christ, the historical Jesus, was, if he existed, which there is very many reasons to doubt that Jesus ever existed, but most biblical scholars seem to believe that he was, in the very least, a liberal reformer of Judaism of that time, during the 0 BC, during the late Roman Empire. But Jesus was a communist who hated men and whose mission was to destroy the power of a man over his household and nation, and he gave it over to women in the slave class. Okay, Jesus exhibited an enormous sympathy and an unconventional and exceptional, like a revolutionary sympathy for the lower castes of society, just as generally the tribe, the unmentionable tribe, tends to do. They tend to use the lower classes to undermine the upper classes. So let me first begin with verses from the Bible that Christians will pull up to make a case that Christianity is a patriarchal religion. The first one is from the first book of the Bible, how fitting, Genesis chapter 3, verse 16. To the woman, he, Yahweh, said, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. So in the book of Genesis, God creates humans. He creates Adam first in chapter 3, and then creates woman by separating him from the rib cage of Adam. And he commands the first humans to that they may eat of any of the trees in the Garden of Eden, except for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But as we all know, the serpent tempts Eve, and Eve eats the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil and tempts Adam into eating of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, and that is how humanity inherited original sin, and that is why there is suffering on the earth. And it is also the reason why God punished Eve by placing her under the servitude and slavery of man. What this means is that male hierarchy and patriarchy is not part of God's natural design. Male patriarchy and hierarchy over woman did not come into being until humanity sinned against God. And God brought about authority of man over woman as a punishment. It was not part of his original design. And as a matter of fact, I'd like to point out that humanity appears to have been created twice in the book of Genesis. There is the account of Adam being created from the dust in Genesis chapter 3, but there is the other account of humanity being created in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. After he has made the heavens and the earth, after he has divided the waters, and he has made all of the creeping things of the earth, the fish of the sea, excuse me for my face, and the birds of the air, the verse says, quote, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them." So this verse seems to strongly insinuate, number one, that God is androgynous, that he is both male and female. After all, the verse emphasizes twice in two different inflections that God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. It very strongly seems to suggest that God has both male and female qualities, despite that God is using the male pronoun in this passage, as over time God has appropriated the male pronoun. That was not always the case in the original Old Testament. So humanity was created by an androgynous God, not a male God, male patriarchal God, and this androgynous God punished humanity by dividing them into two sexes, essentially. Now, Adam and Eve were created as two different sexes, apparently, in chapter 3, but what you have to realize is that the main difference between them, the contentious difference, that is man's authority and power and superiority over woman, came as a result of man's crime against God, against the Creator, against the demiurge, if you are into Gnostic lore like I am. So according to the book of Genesis and according to Christianity, the authority that men have over women isn't something that evolved over many generations, over millions of years. It isn't part of the natural order, and it is not something that men have merited and earned. It was something that an outside force, which had created man, has foisted onto the human race, and is something that God privileged men to have authority over women. Okay, this Genesis portrayal is actually the feminist portrayal of what women think male authority, what the patriarchy is. It is a feminist portrayal. Like this book of Genesis could have been written by feminists, because it is because the patriarchy, according to Genesis, is what feminists think the patriarchy is in their ideology. A punishment, okay, something that God has privileged men with power over women. It isn't something that men earned. It isn't something that men adapted to or evolved. The differences between men and women aren't something that has naturally occurred over many millions of years. It's instead something that happened very recently that God used to punish and suppress man with, and therefore is something to be overcome. our natural tendencies, our biology, according to Christianity, are not something that is adaptive and that we should fall in line to. It is something that needs to be overcome. It is sinful and it is evil. Male patriarchy in the book of Genesis is evil. The sex differences are a punishment. They are not part of God's natural order. That's what this passage is saying. It isn't good. Male authority is the scientific worldview knows, is part of the natural order. Men are biologically wired to have authority over women because of the traits of our biology of being stronger, having more genetic variance, so more geniuses at the tail ends of our bell curve, being more system-oriented is another example. While women are more personal empathic, men have a stronger mentality for systems and essentially building things, and men are human doings. All of the attributes that put men in a position of authority over women, that's a part of the natural order. But that isn't how the Old Testament portrays it. The Old Testament, the Christian creation story, portrays the woman's subjection to the man as a punishment that Jesus Christ, many thousands of years later, died on the cross in order to redeem humanity from. Heaven, after all, is androgynous, as Jesus will later explain in the book of Matthew. And in Christianity seems to be a path of overcoming the differences between men and women. And in the Old Testament, the differences between men and women are a result of sin. It is essentially evil. Patriarchy is evil. Even though it seems to have been created by God, it was not originally part of the natural order. God, when sin came into the world, so did the patriarchy. And so naturally, when sin finally is vanquished from the world, the patriarchy, men's authority, men's identity, men's authority over women will also be vanquished. Just like sin, male patriarchy is something alien to humanity. It's something that was not supposed to occur, but it did out of humanity's free will. And we could have other arguments about that, but the point is that patriarchy is part of the sin and suffering and the evil that entered the world, according to Christianity. Let's move on to the New Testament now. Let's to the epistles of Paul. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 11 through 15. Let a woman learn in silence with all submission. And I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man, but to be in silence. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman, being deceived, fell into transgression. Nevertheless, she will be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with self-control. This is an infamous verse. Probably more infamous than the Genesis 3:16 verse. For the case that Christianity is oppressive to women and is misogynistic and sexist. Okay, and again, on its face, most Christians will interpret, most patriarchal type Christians who think Christianity is patriarchal will reference it and say, see, women should be silent and submissive. The only problem is that that's not what this verse says at all after I did some research. You see, first of all, besides interpreting what Paul is actually saying in 1 Timothy 2:11, okay, you need to consider the Bible. You need to consider the epistle, the letters that Paul wrote in their cultural context of 2,000 years ago, okay? This verse is no more misogynistic than any other religion or culture of its time. And in fact, it's less so because Jewish women and other non-Christian women were actually discouraged from learning at all. See, you need to read the emphasis properly. And if you read the emphasis and inflection properly on this verse, you realize that Paul is not telling women to always remain silent and always remain in submission. No, because if he was, that would be contradicting the subsequent verses that follow in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, where he is actually instructing women on how to pray and prophesy during church services. That is, with their heads covered. Okay, and it would also contradict verses from the book of Acts. Acts chapter 2, verses 17 through 18, where women are able to prophesy. I'll quote it. Peter said, "In the last days, God says, I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions. Your old men will see dreams. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my spirit in those days, and they will prophesy." So, no, Paul is not instructing women to always be silent and to always be submissive to men. He was giving very specific instructions in a very specific context, in a very specific cultural context, where even if he were telling women to always remain silent and to always remain submissive, that would not have been any more misogynistic than any other, than the conservative Jewish culture that Christianity was being a counter-revolutionary force to. You have to remember that the early Christians, first of all, were mostly all Jewish. They were exclusively Jewish. All the authors of the New Testament, all the authors of the Bible are ethnically Jewish. And these ethnic Jews, the early Christians, were really a revolutionary group against Orthodox, conservative, patriarchal Judaism. Okay, so they were introducing a very softer version of patriarchy, Paul was, than the patriarchy of their day. So in that sense, they are liberal reformers. And Paul was instructing women that they should learn, that, I'll quote this again, "Let a woman," quote, "learn in silence with all submission." He's telling women how to learn. Now, besides that, women actually in that day weren't even allowed to learn. Okay, they were highly discouraged from even learning from men, let alone participating in religious ceremonies. So what Christianity represents is that men and women, this is some of the first times that men and women, at least in Jewish culture, are coming together and like worshiping in an egalitarian sense. And this is Paul bringing men from up here, kind of dragging them back down and bringing the women up. And so the result is like people think it's way up here, but really in comparison, it's being brought down closer to the middle. Christianity just, it's the first step in the feminist process, the egalitarian process. So let's move on to another verse. Another one from 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 5, about marriage and family. Quote, "For if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how will he take care of the church of God?" Again, another seemingly family supporting verse, very, very innocuous, very neutral. 1 Timothy chapter 11, verses 8 through 12. And this one is about a woman comes from a man and should be under his authority. Quote, "For man is not from woman, but woman is from man. Nor was man created for the woman, but woman for the man. For this reason, the woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels. Nevertheless, neither is man independent of woman, nor is woman independent of man in the Lord. For as woman came from man, even so man also comes through woman. But all things are from God." See, this verse, which is again from Paul. Most of these, what I'm going to be quoting, are from Paul now. This is another example of a softer version of patriarchy. Again, because feminism has infiltrated, it completely controls our society. Because of that, we are geared to believe, if it's not just explicitly women having power over men, we think that, this is patriarchal, or this is just non-feminist. No. What Paul is doing is he's softening the patriarchy right now, as I've been saying. But what he has to do in order to undermine patriarchy is he has to make enough appeals to it to make it seem like, we are on the patriarchy side. We are on the side of men, okay? But you were also... So let me read it again. So for man is not from woman, but woman is from man. And he's referencing, again, Genesis, where Eve, the first woman was created out of the rib of Adam. So the first woman came from man, but then and then he says later, for as woman came from man, even so man also comes through woman. So towards the first few verses seem very patriarchal, but the second few verses from nevertheless neither is man independent of woman nor woman independent of man, he's saying like, oh well, because man has kind of a spiritual authority, like he's kind of like, all right, making the appeal again, like, look, men have spiritual authority, but you're still equal. It's kind of doublethink, okay? But again, all of Christianity is lies and doublethink. Lies, doublethink, manipulation, and undermining. Brilliant, actually. It's the brilliant, what I might call industrialization of lying. Cherokee. Let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3, again from another epistle from Paul. Man is the head of every woman. And I'll quote, "But I want you to know that the head of every man is Christ, the head of woman is man, and the head of Christ is God." Okay, again, this seems like a patriarchal verse that says that men have authority over women, correct? That's what it says. The man, the head of woman is man. Okay, but again, what I want to emphasize to you, okay, is that the head of every man is Christ. Okay, so every man is a slave to Christ. If my case is correct and Christ is a feminist, therefore men must all obey a feminist beta male cuck overlord demigod. Okay, if your demigod, if your Christ is a blue-pilled cuck, do you really have any authority? If you need to obey a man who gives power to women, this is a cycle, okay? Yes, man is the head of woman, that's what the verse says, but the head of every man is Christ. What is Christ? Christ is the blue pill. Christ is the feminist. Christ is the ever lover, the merciful, compassionate one, always forgiving. He always forgives women, and I will explain this later on in this video, that Christ is very, very, very blue pilled by what if Christ, if anyone else but Christ lived the way that he had, MGTOW, red pill types would call it blue pilled. You just would have to, okay? If Christ is a feminist, then the head of every man is a feminist. That's what I'm trying to say. And in that case, men don't really have power. Let's move on. I almost forgot another verse from one of the letters of Paul, from 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 4. Quote, "The wife hath not power of her own body, but the husband. And likewise also the husband hath not power of his own body, but the wife." Again, this is a general vague appeal to egalitarianism, where now instead of men having authority over a woman, now they are both equals. He not only does the first part of the verse seems to appeal to a patriarchy, saying that the wife doesn't have any power over her own body, but the husband does. But it adds in the second part of the verse, "But likewise the husband, it does not have any power over his body, but the wife." So your wife now has power over your body. The verse begins by stating something that was already implicit for thousands of years in patriarchy, but now, with the revolution of Christianity, women also have ownership over you, as a man, your body. Another verse from our good friend Paul, who basically invented Christianity. But anyways, Ephesians chapter 5, verse 33. This one is about loving your wife as yourself and the wife respecting the husband. And I quote, "Nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband." So you are commanded to love your wife the same way that you do yourself. Tell me, is that a blue-pilled idea? To use, the modern day internet jargon, forgive me, but blue pill just being to define it based on ignorance of the true nature of the female sex. Tell me, if I were to give you the advice to love your wife as yourself, would that be considered good advice from a red pilled perspective? No. Because the red pill, just examining as a philosophy and not as objective truth. But even as a philosophy, it is based on self-interest, okay? One who is self-interested does not love anyone, well, more than himself. But this command is disempowering, okay? That you must love you, but this is telling husbands to be devoted to their wives beyond rationality. And let the wife see that she respects the husband. So again, Paul is like, if he had just said, husbands, love your wives as yourselves, that could have raised some suspicious eyebrows, as you see mine being raised in suspicion. But he reinforces this, as another form of lying. But wives, see that you respect your husbands. Galatians chapter 3, verse 28 talks about men and women are being equal under God. Quote, "There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." Unquote. Again, there is neither male nor female. As a matter of fact, this could be one of the most damning verses of all. This is a counter verse. This is a verse Paul wrote that, if anything, is highly egalitarian, highly feminist. Definitely not pro-patriarchy. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There's no distinguishing between racial castes. There's neither slave nor free. There's no distinguishing between economic classes either. Communism, anyone? That's communism. That's the communist dream. Okay, that was Christ's goal, and now it's Paul's goal as well, is to mingle and fuse and disintegrate all the variations between people and between classes. And there is neither male nor female, for you are all one under Christ Jesus. Neither male nor female. I've said it 3 times. It's right there in your Bible that, that the politically masculine right is saying is a patriarchal religion. It's healthy and misogynistic and sexist, and nope, it is not. There is neither male nor female under Christ Jesus. And last but not least, from the epistles of Paul, and I just want to, sucker punch the Christians in the gut, is where Paul actually admits that he made all of this up. See, what you have to realize is that, in case, you aren't a Christian or you are a Christian and you just don't read your Bible, Paul faked his conversion to Christianity. He was originally persecuting Christians and killing them. And I believe he was under Roman authority, so he was also a race traitor. And he was hunting down Christians, and then he realized one day, wait a minute, this abominable, disgusting religion that is perverting the masses and perverting the Jews would be an awesome weapon to wield against the Romans that he also hated. And so he faked his conversion, and right here it says in Galatians, the first chapter, verse 12, quote, "For I neither received it from man, nor was I taught it, but it came through revelation of Jesus Christ." Well, the problem is that Paul never met Jesus Christ. Could be because Jesus didn't exist, or because Paul made Jesus up, or Jesus Christ was based off of a Jewish revolutionary who was executed, and no one would have really thought about him unless Paul had not concocted his genius idea to create a hoax to destroy the Roman Empire. Which should be evident in these verses already, because what you have to realize is that Rome had a very strong martial culture. They had a very strong, they were, in particular, I read in a book last night, they were very skeptical of the fervor, the hysterical zealotry and fervor of the Christians when they were first proselytizing and spreading out across the empire. And you have to realize that Christianity was just one sect among all these other mystery religions and other pagan religions, and it was just treated as such, like people today just kind of roll their eyes in Antifa, burning another Wendy's down. Oh boy, another statue. Like, people kind of roll their eyes. Oh, a bunch of goobers, running around with dildos and spray painting things. Oh, they're crazy. They've just got this weird, nothing they say makes sense. Like, no one will ever believe them. Yeah, that's what they said about Christians. Well, on that dark note, So yes, in this verse, for I neither received it from man, nor was I taught it, but it came through revelation of Jesus Christ. He's saying this came from revelation of Jesus Christ. Because Paul, one day on the road to Damascus, had a vision. Okay, a vision. Right, yeah. Like we believe anyone else who would just, I had this vision. Oh. He pretended to have a vision, and he pretended that he had seen Jesus Christ. And again, this was before the Gospels were actually written. And as a matter of fact, this is the reason why I've begun with the epistles of Paul and the writings that Paul produced in the New Testament, which is the bulk of the New Testament, actually. Because the epistles of Paul wrote his letters before the Gospels, the 4 canonical Gospels, synoptic Gospels were written, which lends credibility to the hypothesis that Paul made Jesus up. It would make total sense, because if you read the New Testament, you read all of Paul's verses, what's conspicuously missing in all of his descriptions of Jesus Christ? Well, there's no biographical information. There's almost no biographical information about Jesus Christ in any of the letters that Paul wrote, even though Paul had said that he had experienced a vision where Jesus Christ had come to him and spoke to him and gave him the revelations that he's writing to people. It was only decades later and over the course of an entire century that the 4 Gospels were written. First one, and then 20 years later, another one. 20 years later, another gospel, and then another 20, maybe even 30, 40 years. Then finally, the last one was the Gospel of John, the most robust one, and the one, by the way, that makes the most appeals to Greek philosophy. It begins with Jesus Christ was the Word, and when the word that's used for that is logos. So the writer, the author of John, is trying to appeal to Greek philosophers and Gentiles who hadn't been wiped out by Christianity yet, and whom also Paul had written that he says in a verse, I don't have it up on the screen on my screen right now, but Paul had said that they would make the foolishness of the wise and the wise of the foolish. Okay, Paul despised the philosophy of the Greeks, and you can tell this entire Christian religion, it dumbs people down. It makes people dumb. It makes them immune to any kind of rationality and common sense. And it was explicitly designed this way. Okay, it was designed to destroy the Greek philosophies that were flourishing at that time and almost led to the industrialization of Rome. Okay, so now I have explained all of the verses of the Bible that purport that Christians use to advocate that their religion is a patriarchal religion. And these are the verses also that feminists will bring up whenever they have a problem with Christianity and say Christianity needs to be reformed. It's not feministic enough, even though it is the original feminism. Christianity is the original feminism, and you will again see that in the next part of my presentation. I would like to bring now. Let me tell you the glaring problem with all of these verses that I have not yet mentioned. And this is the problem that just damns all of these verses. None of these verses count at all. If you quote any of these verses to me, I will tell you what I tell all Christians, and it just leaves them awestruck. And would you like to know what it is? Jesus Christ never uttered any of them. Look, I've quoted from the book of Genesis. That was written by Moses. And the rest of the verses were written by Paul. And I just explained to you that Paul faked his conversion. Paul never met Jesus Christ physically in body, in person. He never met Jesus. He never met him resurrected. Okay, he saw him in a vision. That resurrection story hadn't been concocted yet. So the Christ is always referred to very vaguely in the epistles of Paul. And why? Because he made him up, because that story hadn't really been solidified yet. But the problem with all of these verses is that, see, most Christians, and this is a problem generally like almost with all Christian, especially with Catholicism and Russian Orthodoxy. Okay, I was raised Protestant. I was raised in a Free Methodist church, and then I transitioned to a kind of Pentecostal evangelical cult, basically. Grew up in a church for about 4 years during my teenage years, when I was between like 14 and 18, in a church, a cult that was literally trying to be one of the early Christian churches of the book of Acts, okay? And I quoted Acts earlier, and these kinds of Christians believe that we are living in the end days. I mean, judging by the news cycle, I wouldn't blame people anymore for thinking we were in the end days, but that point aside, they actually believe that with enough faith and prayer, that miracles will occur. My spiritual mentor was trying to teach me how to prophesy and teach me how to heal people with my prayer in my hands. And thank God, I never quite swallowed any of it all, but I investigated it incredibly fervently. I did plenty of investigating, and obviously miracles do not occur. Okay, they violate the laws of physics. But I never really understood just how insane people can be, I really didn't want to believe that virtually every other person except me, surrounding me, like everyone in my neighborhood, everyone around me could be clinically insane. And they were. Everyone in this church, in the Christian church, but in particularly in the church that I grew up in, was clinically insane. And I was just too naive to realize that. That was a tangential biographical note. But yes, the problem with all the verses that feminists will cite saying that Christianity is a sexist religion, and the Christians who say no, Christianity is a patriarchal religion, is that Jesus never uttered these words. These are not the words of Jesus; they're the words of Paul and the Old Testament. They're the writings of Old Testament authors. But now I am going to show you what Jesus Christ, your Messiah, the man that you are supposed to worship and emulate and follow, what he actually did. And boy, oh freaking boy, was he a feminist. Yes, he was. Here we go. Let me show you. I will pull this up. So, forgive me. Yes, what you are seeing is Wikipedia. Please bear in mind, I understand the source has a left-wing reputation. I understand this, but please bear with me and consider the information that I'm about to impart to you. Okay, I'd actually spent many days basically investigating all of this information for myself, and then simply found a Wikipedia page. And I'm sorry, but this has everything here. Jesus's interactions with women. So let's begin with my ironclad case that Jesus Christ is a feminist. Here we go. The high number of references to women. According to New Testament scholar Frank Stagg and classicist Evelyn Stagg, the synoptic Gospels of the canonical New Testament contain a relatively high number of references to women. Evangelical Bible scholar Gilbert, I can't pronounce the name, sorry, agrees, especially by comparison with literary works of the same epoch. Okay, again, this is what I'm explaining to you, is the historical context. Okay, so compared to other historical works like the book, the Epic of Gilgamesh, etc., works of this time period, there is an exceptional amount of women mentioned. Neither Staggs nor Bilzican find any recorded instance where Jesus disgraces, belittles, reproaches, or stereotypes a woman. Nowhere in the Bible does Jesus do so much as criticize a woman or reprimand her whatsoever. He does not disgrace, belittle, reproach, or stereotype a woman. These writers claim that examples of the manner of Jesus are instructive for inferring his attitudes toward women and show repeatedly how he liberated and affirmed women. This is true. Starr writes that of all founders of religion and religious sects, Jesus stands alone as the one who did not discriminate in some way against women. By word or deed, he never encouraged the disparagement of a woman. Karen King concludes, based on the account of Jesus' interaction with a Syrophoenician woman in Mark 7:24-30 and Matthew 15:21-28, that an unnamed Gentile woman taught Jesus that the ministry of God is not limited to particular groups and persons, but belongs to all who have faith. Now, bear in mind that some of these scholars, they might be feminists, okay? And there are certainly groups of like Christian feminists who will say the things that I am saying, but I'm giving this presentation this slant that Christianity is not a sexist religion, and it is not a religion that is going to bring patriarchy and save Western civilization. I mean, Christianity originally destroyed Western civilization because of the factors that I'm showing you, because of Jesus' attitudes toward women and towards social castes, and how he actually destroyed all of these things, and he destroyed gender relations and destroyed the family unit. Jesus had many more verses about how he was dividing families than he is about supporting families. All of the pro-family verses, as I showed you earlier, those come from Paul. As a Christian, I was following Jesus Christ, not Paul. Okay? I don't quite understand why Christians believe that Paul was Jesus, because Christianity is about Christ, not Paul. Okay? Like you Christians need to reference all of Paul's verses to Christ. And a lot of them, they don't correlate. Jesus had very different views on women and on family than did Paul. As a matter of fact, I would credit Paul, in the very least, besides the fact that he was a liar, that he destroyed Rome almost single-handedly with his disciples and followers. But in the very least, he kind of fixed Christianity from being what it really was the original ancient communism that would have just given women all power and just would have Jesus was far more extreme. He hated the family unit. Jesus hated the family unit. And I'll show you later. And communists hate the family. Okay, the first thing that communists always go after is the family, because that stands in the way of a totalitarian state. Let's go on, though. Women as disciples. The Gospels of the New Testament, written toward the last quarter of the 1st century AD, often mention Jesus speaking to women publicly and openly against the social norms of the time. From the beginning, Jewish women disciples, including Mary Magdalene, Joanna, and Susanna, had accompanied Jesus during his ministry and supported him out of their private means. There's evidence in several New Testament passages that Jesus had female disciples. He first cites the reported occasion when Jesus' family appeared and asked to speak with him. And Jesus replied, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" And stretching out his hand toward his disciples, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of the Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother." Matthew chapter 12, verses 46-50. It is argued Jesus could not properly have gestured to a crowd of men and said, "Here are my brother and sister and mother." He could have only said that to a crowd of both men and women. Therefore, the disciples standing before him were composed of men and women. So let's break this down. So first of all, Jesus had a number of noble women. So these are women from the upper classes who were funding his movement out of their private means, out of the resources. Women weren't making money. This was probably their husband's money, if anything. How do women make money in the ancient days? They can't do anything but have babies. I mean, like today, but like that's still a relevant question, right? But like especially in the ancient days of Jesus Christ, where would noble women get this money? They inherit it, or it's their husband's money. So women, we've seen this before. Upper class white women use their money to fund Antifa and BLM and liberal organizations. Likewise, ancient noble women of the same upper class women are spending their husband's money to fund a egalitarian, communist, revolutionary movement. It's the exact same parallel. Again, ancient Christians were basically Antifa. It was a liberal reformation. Okay, it was a movement toward kind of a progressive, the same beliefs as communism. And you see it right here. And Jesus had both male and female disciples. And again, when we're talking about feminism, feminism has always purported itself to be egalitarian. Okay, that's its guise when it's actually female supremacist, but it always rides under the radar by claiming to be egalitarian. So men and women come together. But whenever men and women come and mix, if men don't have authority, if men no longer have the special privilege, then women have the privilege. Okay, women are able to rise to power. Let's move on. Women of obscurity noted by Jesus. Women of obscurity noticed by Jesus. The Gospels record several instances where Jesus reaches out to unnoticeable women, inconspicuous silent sufferers who blend into the background and are seen by others as negligible entities destined to exist on the fringes of life. Jesus notices them, recognizes their need, and in one gloriously wrenching moment, he thrusts them onto the center stage of drama, of redemption, with the spotlights of eternity beaming down upon them, and he immortalizes them into sacred history. See, this is why my hysterical mother loved Christianity. Oh my God, she was that first service we went to, that Free Methodist church. As soon as they had the altar call, she, arms flailing, just sprinting down the aisle. I love Jesus. This is why women love Jesus. Early Christianity at most points was 2/3 populated by women. It was mostly vanguarded by women. And that's not to mention what lower castes that the men came from. Like I said, Christianity was 2,000-year-old Antifa. And women love this narrative of, what do liberals say? Those who are, they protect minorities and those who are in the shadows of society. We need to bring them out into the light. Women love this. It seduces women. They love this idea of, going out and helping the poor and raising up the people that everyone else hates, while never asking themselves, why do we hate these people? Why are these people in the lower castes? Why? Here are some examples. Peter's mother-in-law from these verses. The 3 synoptic gospels all record the healing of Simon Peter's mother-in-law. When Jesus came into Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. He healed the woman of fever by touching her hand. She rose and began to wait on him. With this particular healing, something unique occurs. Quite often after being healed, people left Jesus to go about their renewed lives. Peter's mother-in-law, however, immediately rose and began to serve him. Here's another one. The woman who touched Jesus' garment. This is very long. Considering whether I should read it or not, I will. Jesus practiced the ministry of touch, sometimes touching the untouchables and letting them touch him. Again, this is another reference. Jesus is always breaking the social conventions established by a robust, healthy patriarchy. These conventions that clearly state higher caste, lower caste, the upper caste of superior people who keep Rome running, who keep a tolerant, polytheistic, robust male society where men aren't the victims of polygamy. And Jesus comes in and destroys it all. Among the things considered defiling, disqualifying one for the rituals of religion was an issue of blood, especially menstruation or hemorrhage. One such woman had been plagued with a flow of blood for 12 years, no one having been able to heal her. She found the faith in a crowd to force her way up to Jesus, approaching him from behind, so as to remain inconspicuous and simply touching his garment. When he did, 2 things happened. The flows of blood stopped, and she was discovered. Jesus turned and asked who touched him. The disciples tried to brush aside the question, protesting that in such a crowd, no individual could be singled out. I think what's most relevant here is, rather, he relieved He relieved her of any sense of guilt for her seemingly rash act, lifted her up, and called her daughter. He told her that her faith had saved her, gave her his love, and sent her away whole. Wow, how touching. What touching, how touching. Oh, but Adam, what problems do you have with women with Jesus healing people? Well, you see, it didn't happen. It didn't happen. And yet women believe it. So let's move on to women as models of faith. Jesus, who always kept his covenant of chastity, presented women as models of faith to his listeners. Remember, this is the Jesus who had said that even if you look upon a woman with lust, if a man looks upon a woman, even looks upon her with lust, you've committed adultery with her. You've committed exactly the same thing, equating. I'll get to that later, though. So, Jesus could not have possibly been chaste. Even if he did exist, I don't believe that. Not with his influence. In the culture of his day, and again, actually, like, women would elevate a chaste male. Like, that is the quintessential beta male, is a man who is essentially a lifelong virgin. That is ultimately what a blue-pilled philosophy is going to turn a man into, is a man who has just never carnally known a woman, because that would require conquering her. But Jesus can't conquer anyone, okay? He can't conquer a woman. He is merciful and compassionate on them. He's only friends and disciples with them. He cannot know. The Christian cannot know a woman. A true Christian, not one who thinks Paul was converted, okay? Not one who just only reads Paul, but also follows Jesus, would also have to make an oath of celibacy. In the culture of the day, women were neither to be seen nor heard, since they were considered corrupting influences to be shunned and disdained. The wisdom that has been lost. The wisdom that has been. Women were considered to be corrupting influences to be shunned and disdained. There's something I can get behind. And here are the examples: the widow of Zarephath, the queen of the south, the parable of the 10 virgins, the persistent widow, and a poor widow's offering. This one is an explanation. Let's read it. Jesus honors a poor widow who cast 2 copper coins into the temple treasury. What the widow gave to God was the totality of her belongings. Women had only limited access to the temple in Jerusalem. There Jesus found the most praiseworthy piety and sacrificial giving, not in the rich contributors, but in a poor woman. Let's move on. Women as models of Jesus' work. In the parable of the lost coin and the parable of the leaven, Jesus presents his work and the growth of the kingdom of God in terms of a woman and her domestic work. The parables follow the parable of the lost sheep and the parable of the mustard seed, respectively, and share the same messages as their more male-oriented counterparts. Jesus asks people, male or female, privileged or peasant, it doesn't matter, to enter the domain of a first-century woman and household cook in order to gain perspective on the domain of God. Again, this is another example of Jesus breaking the class boundaries, which is what feminism is all about. Feminism is eternally cognizant of its own inferiority. Women are constantly aware of their eternal inferiority to men. And therefore, that's why they are obsessed with class differences. They're obsessed with power differences. And that's why they are obsessed with equalizing everything, because they are aware of their innate inferiority. Jesus knew the female psyche. He knew that women are always cognizant of their inferiority, and therefore always appealed to the female psyche in his hatred of male authority. He appealed to the female psyche of bringing everyone down to the same, let's get everyone together. Here's the next section. Women as persons of value, raising their dead. The Gospels describe 3 miracles of Jesus raising persons from the dead. In 2 out of 3 of those incidents, the dead are restored to women, to Mary and Martha, their brother Lazarus, and to the unnamed widow from Nain, her only son. The warning against lust. Okay, let's talk about the warning against lust. Quote, you have heard it said that to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery within his heart. This is the quintessential feminist Me Too passage. Okay, so who else equates literally looking at a woman with unwanted sexual desire, who else equates that with a crime against women? Well, feminists do. That's what the hashtag #MeToo movement was about, okay? Basically criminalizing as many... It's a point where if your eye lingers, like Jesus would have been a hashtag #MeToo feminist because of this verse, okay? He equates what happens in your brain, what's happening in your brain and in your eyes is exactly the same as just screwing her right there. And this is instilling guilt on men. Like, this is the chapter that tortured me for most of my teenage years. For a great quantity of my young adulthood, I was tortured purposefully by Christians with this verse that you can't even look upon women with lust. You cannot have your biological desire. Jesus is commanding men to deny their biological desires. That's an entirely blue-pilled notion. This is entirely founded upon a hashtag #MeToo ideology. Okay, that men can't even, that they can't even, basically you have to be able to read a woman's mind. The warning against divorce. Jesus expounded upon in the book of Deuteronomy. I actually have this verse as well. In Matthew chapter 19, verses 3 through 11, the Pharisees also came to him, testing him, and saying to him, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason?" And Christ answered them and said to him, "Have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female? And said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So then they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore what God has joined together, let not man separate." They said to him, "Why then did Moses command to give a certificate of divorce and put her away?" He said to them, "Moses, because of his hardness of your hearts, permitted you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another, commits adultery. And whoever marries her who is divorced commits adultery." His disciples said to him, "If such is the case of the man with his wife, it is better to not marry." But Jesus said to them, "All cannot accept this saying, but only those to whom it has been given." Let's break this down. So, on the surface, this would seem to be a very pro-marriage. This is generally used. I believe this part of this is even used in marriage vows. Let not man separate. What God has joined together, let not man separate. This would seem to be very pro relationships. This would seem to be conducive towards sexual harmony. Right? Wrong. No. So what's happening is, these disciples say that themselves, is Jesus is setting a new precedent for marriage. Okay, so before, in the patriarchy, the Jewish patriarchy, men could divorce their wives for any reason. Under Roman law, under early Roman law, in the early Roman Republic, divorces were only allowed to be committed by men. Only men could divorce the wife. And a man, if he saw fit, could murder his entire family. Now, before you go whoa at me, like, whoa, Adam, like, that's making, you're insane, that's making us uncomfortable, like, even us big towel guys are not that sexist, we're not that. Bear in mind that Rome never collapsed because of an epidemic of men killing off their families. As a matter of fact, I don't know how many times that happened, if at all. It seems like it happened very rarely. It didn't seem to be a very great big problem of Roman husbands just wouldn't stop murdering their families and causing the whole empire to collapse. Like, you might wonder, why would the Romans in ancient society allow a man to kill off his whole family if he saw fit? Well, we can conclude that almost never happened, probably, that men used their authority responsibly. Why? Because men, because of our biology, are more responsible than women. We don't just kill off our entire families. Women, however, when we give women power, the same kind of power that they want from men, women almost always emotionally kill off their family, and physically too. Women have committed tens of millions of abortions, for example. They kill their own children ceaselessly. And feminists have fought for that right. Remarkably, like one of the only things that Christianity hasn't aligned with feminists on might be abortion. But I mean, that's if you don't count like early Gnostic sects, by the way. Like I haven't even gotten into like there were different versions of Christianity. I'm just simply critiquing like what is orthodoxy today, like kind of Protestant, Catholic, or Byzantine. Like I'm not even getting into Gnosticism. In Gnosticism, they believe that the body is evil, and that all sexuality is evil, and they encouraged abortions, and that was an early Christian sect. Okay, so there weren't versions of Christianity that that allowed for abortion, and they were the Gnostics. But again, I'm not getting into that right now because this is a tremendously long video as it is. So what's happening in this verse is that Jesus is he giving any more authority to men? No, he's taking men's authority away. Now, Jesus has set a precedent in his new religion that you cannot divorce a woman for any other reason except adultery. So this takes away power from men. He's not giving women more power. See, that's the thing. That's the thing with Christianity, is it's never explicit about giving women power. What it does is it's taking power and authority away from men and giving it to Jesus Christ, who himself was a feminist, as I'm illustrating right now in his philosophy and his actions. And if the head of your household is a blue-pilled if the head of the household worships an avatar who is a feminist, then essentially you have a feminist household. So Jesus has taken away the power of men to be able to divorce their wives if they misbehave, if they are, for lack of a better term, bitchly, okay, if they are evil harpies. So, and the disciples very rationally say, wow, boss, that's a really bad deal. I don't think any of us want to be married anymore. His disciples, right in front of Jesus' face, just all immediately go MGTOW. They say, wow, it's just better to not marry if that's the case. And how does Jesus respond? He doesn't respond and say, oh, well, no, it's not quite like, He just says, well, not everyone can accept the saying, except those to whom it's been given. He completely doubles down on it. So he takes away, so even in the verses where it seems, oh no, Christ came to restore the harmony between the sexes and to restore harmony between men and women. No, he takes men's power away. And what's happening now in marriages, if you have a Christian marriage, if a man can't divorce his wife, the wife is no longer incentivized to behave. Okay, all she has to do is not commit adultery, which even that's too much to ask nowadays. But like now, marriage is a much less conscionable contract for a man to get into if he can't get out of it for any reason other than, as a matter of fact, like he might be incentivized to like frame her for adultery, for example, right? Like, what would you rather have? A marriage where, like, I would rather have an arrangement where I am allowed to kill my entire family if I see fit, rather than having no power to be able to leave my wife if it turns out that this arrangement is not working and we are not in fact compatible for whatever reason other than sexual immorality. And frankly, even sexual immorality doesn't seem women find enough ways to be able to mental juggle. And again, like, I'm not saying I would like to kill off my entire family. I would rather have that power, okay, than the power that Jesus is giving because, well, I would use it responsibly. What else do I have to say about this verse? Well, it's also, and let's analyze this part. In the beginning, God made them male and female. So there are, in the deepest and darkest corners of Jewish Kabbalism, okay, and there are many Jews who believe it is a part of ancient Judaic lore that God actually created humanity as hermaphrodites. And this comes from Genesis, I believe, chapter 1, verse 16, where, as I had stated earlier, humanity was created twice, in a way. And that Jesus is referencing the first time that humanity was created, because he was created again in I believe chapter 2 of Genesis. He was created again, and in the second time, man was created first, and then from the rib cage, woman. But in the first time, he made them male and female, so he made humanity hermaphroditic. That is a very prevalent interpretation among Jewish Kabbalists and Jewish mysticism. Okay, where Jesus arguably had come from, his background is a mystic, because the Jewish mysticism particularly is also very liberal, like Gnosticism. It's also a very liberal version in many ways. And the two will become one flesh, like male and female. It's hermaphrodism. This is a precursor to transgenderism. Okay, this verse it's highly interpreted by Jews. It's certainly not by Christians. Christians would reject this kind of interpretation, and I'm not saying I interpret that either. But it is a case that there were like the Gnostics who did interpret, kinds of Christians who did interpret male and female, meaning that humans were made both with male and female attributes, that they were hermaphroditic and androgynous. And Jesus says, "For this reason a man shall leave his mother and father and join his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." What's Jesus saying? Jesus is saying that men and women will become one flesh. They become one unit. They become one equal social unit. Now you might say, but men can get to be the head, women get to be the rest of the body. That's not clarified in the verse. That isn't clarified. It's, for all intents and purposes, it makes much more sense to read this as men and women are becoming a single social unit. Man no longer has authority. Jesus never gives man. He clearly, in the next verses, as I just explained, he's taking authority away from men. Okay, he's not making a man the head of the household. No, he's making her his equal. Men and women are equals now in marriage, and that's what makes them collapse, because men and women aren't equal. A man must have authority over a woman. And Jesus rejected that by saying that they become one flesh, that your identity as a man becomes indistinguishable from your wife's identity and vice versa. You mold together. She gets to latch onto you like a parasite. She joins into your flesh and just sucks the life from you. That's what that means. And you can never be separated from her. Ever. No matter if she is sucking the life out of you, you have to continue to forgive and repent for whatever sins you've caused that has cursed you with such a lousy wife. And again, and finally, to conclude with my analysis of Matthew chapter 19, Jesus is basically insinuating that celibacy is a better path toward heaven. Just like any blue pill, it is celibacy, voluntary celibacy is prevalent in the red pill, certainly. But Jesus is advocating celibacy as a better path toward women because that doesn't hurt women. You see, Jesus is afraid of looking upon women with lust, which would be a crime against women. Like, he's following this path of celibacy because committing a crime against a woman is wrong, okay? He has come to upraise women, and looking upon women with sexual desire degrades them because Jesus is essentially a woman with a dick. The next piece of evidence in my case that Christianity is a feminist religion is the fact that Jesus was born of a virgin. Now, yes, the virgin birth myth for messiahs was very common among pagans and Greeks, Greek paganism, and Egyptian paganism as well. And this is no coincidence. You see, Paul, when he was synthetically constructing the religion of Christianity that was going to cause a sort of communist revolution and overthrow and decay and destroy the Roman the Goyim Empire over time, it needed patterns that pagans were familiar with, and they were familiar with this concept of a virgin birth. Now, a Messiah who is born to an adulteress certainly is a feministic trope. this Messiah was born without the need for a male sperm at all, human male sperm. God itself isn't actually male. The Judaic lore doesn't view God, at least in very significant, like, Kabbalistic sects, they don't view God as a male, and it hasn't always been that way. So Jesus being born of a virgin it cancels out the need for a male counterpart, okay? Parthenogenesis. This is like the ultimate dream of feminists, okay? Is to be able to reproduce without males. It's even the theme of a comic, a graphic novel series I actually really liked in college called Why the Last Man, where a scientist invents a way to allow women to reproduce parthenogenically, and it causes all men on Earth to die simultaneously. Parthenogenic birth is like the death marker for the entire male sex, and so having a Messiah who was born without male sperm truly ingrains Christianity as a feministic religion. And I don't remember if I mentioned this earlier, but the first people who witnessed Jesus Christ after the resurrection were women, Mary Magdalene being among them. And again, the Christ came to women first. He came to the women first and told them to preach the gospel to his brothers and his disciples throughout the nations. He gave the first instructions to preach the gospel to women. Okay, I think at this point a quick discussion about Mary Magdalene is also important. Mary Magdalene is among the women depicted in the New Testament who accompanied Jesus and his 12 apostles, and who also helped to support the men financially. According to Mark 15:40, Matthew 27:56, John 19:25, and Luke 23:49, she was one of the women who remained at Jesus' crucifixion. The New Testament says she saw Jesus laid in a tomb. Mark 16:9 reports that after his resurrection, Jesus first appeared to Mary. The New Testament also says that Jesus had cast 7 demons out of her. For centuries, Mary Magdalene was identified in Western Christianity as an adulteress and a repentant prostitute, although nowhere does the New Testament identify her as such. That is interesting. That is interesting that even outside of the Bible, Christians are fervent to turn all their women into repentant prostitutes. There's this running theme of repentant adulteresses. Again, a miracle that never occurs. Okay, a miracle almost as that violates the laws of physics almost as much as feeding an entire mass of people, 5,000 people, with a loaf of bread and a couple fish. A miracle just as wild and unbelievable as a repentant adulteress. Okay. And that's a very common frame in Christianity. And here we come, perhaps, to the most important and damning verse for Jesus's feminism, shall we say. So, it is John chapter 7, verse 53 to John chapter 8, verse 11. It is the story of the woman taken in adultery. Let me begin by reading the verse. You will be very familiar with it. Most Christians have heard of it. And it was the verse that my mother quoted to me all of the time whenever I had a girlfriend cheat on me. Then each of them went home, while Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. Then the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and making her stand before all of them, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law of Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They said this to him to test him, so that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they kept questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And once again he bent down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they went away, one by one, beginning with the elders, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said, "Neither I do condemn you. Go your way, and from now on do not sin again." What a touching story. The only problem with it right now, I will immediately say, is that it's fake. Like fake. Like the entire Bible is obviously fake and concocted lies, but John 7:53 is explicitly faker than all the others. Like it's faker than the book of Daniel, which half of it was written. The passage in the book of Daniel with the prophecies was written after all of these events occurred. And with antiquity, we've been led to believe by Jews and Christians that no, Daniel prophesied these 4 empires. No, he didn't. Those were written afterward. And we know that because of carbon dating. I believe so. Archaeological dating techniques. And we know the same for the story of the woman taken into adultery. This story of the woman taken into adultery was added ostensibly by Christian monks between 300 and 400 years after the Bible was compiled and written together. Okay, let's analyze this. So, knowing that Christian monks added this passage several hundred years after the Bible was compiled, well, what would their motive possibly have been? Why? This is one of the most touching stories in all of the New Testament and all of the Gospels, and it's only found in John. Well, look at what it's portraying. A group of Pharisees, all men, exclusively men, it's a patriarchy after all, bring to Jesus Christ a woman who is caught in the act of adultery. Now, the book of Deuteronomy says that if someone is caught in adultery, both the man and the woman are put to death. But what's missing in John chapter 8? Well, the Pharisees don't bring the man who committed who was, would obviously have to be caught in adultery with this woman. So the man either escaped, somehow bargained with the Pharisees for an exception, whatever, or he is actually among the Pharisees, and one of the Pharisees had seduced a woman into adultery, etc., and is hypocritically challenging Jesus and asking him what to do about this woman. The law says such a woman should be stoned. And by the way, that verse that the Pharisees are referring to from the book of Deuteronomy, stoning was reserved particularly for betrothed virgins. So the implication is that this woman not only was caught in adultery, but she was a virgin, which would therefore merit a death by stoning. And the man is nowhere to be found, could even be among those Pharisees. It could be the Pharisee who is bringing her to Jesus. Very well. Or maybe she wasn't committing adultery at all. Now, none of that generally matters, though, except for the critique of what is Christianity? What is Christianity saying? How is Jesus portrayed? And how is the patriarchy portrayed? Well, this patriarchy, this group of Pharisees, is portrayed as a group of men who are exploiting a woman in order to protect themselves. And that is the definition of a patriarchy according to feminists. John chapter 8 is perhaps one of the earliest and most vivid depictions of what women think a patriarchy is. A group of men, a group of Pharisees, protecting themselves at the expense of women. That's what feminists think patriarchy is. And not only is this the most touching and probably the most famous book, the most famous passage in all of the New Testament, in all of the Gospels. This is one of the most well-known encounters Jesus had with the Pharisees, that he had always but the patriarchy he always was railing against and calling hypocrites and calling exploiters of the lower classes and exploiters of women. But why would you have been motivated to add this, to elaborate on Jesus' feminism and add this several hundred years after the fact? Christian monks clearly were motivated by an effusive kind of gynocentrism. Okay, they were appealing to what women think a patriarchy is. Let's next discuss the woman at the well in Samaria. If the previous passage in John chapter 8 is not the most touching and famous of passages from the New Testament in the Bible, surely the woman in the well of Samaria is. Let's read it, and let's read at least as much as I can while I'm patient in the New King James Version. It will load. Therefore, when the Lord knew the Pharisees had heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John, though Jesus himself did not baptize but his disciples, he left Judea and departed again to Galilee, but he needed to go through Samaria. So he came to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied from his journey, sat thus by the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman of Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink," for his disciples had gone away in the city to buy food. Then the woman of Samaria said to him, "How is it that you, being a Jew, asked a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." Jesus answered and said to her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is, I say to you, give me a drink, you would have said and asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as well as his sons and his livestock?" Jesus answered and said to her, "Whoever drinks of this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst. But the water I shall give him will be in a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water, that I may not thirst, nor come here to draw." Jesus said to her, "Go, call your husband, and come here." The woman answered and said, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You have well said, I have no husband, for you have 5 husbands, and the one whom you have now is not your husband. In that you spoke truly." The woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and you Jews say that in Jerusalem is the place where one ought to worship." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews." Did you hear that, Nick Fuentes fans? Salvation is of... Did you hear that? Jesus himself said it's of the Jews. Salvation is of the Jews. Unless you think white people are Jews, I think you're completely crazy to think that Christianity is a European religion after hearing that. But anyways, but the hour is coming, and now is when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. The woman said to him, "I know the Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, will he tell us all things?" Jesus said to her, "I who speak to you am he." At this point his disciples came, and they marveled that he talked with a woman, yet no one said, "What do you seek?" or "Why are you talking with her?" The woman left her water pot, went her way into the city, and said to the men, "Come, see a man who told me all things that I ever did. Could this be the Christ?" Then they went out of the city and came to him. I will not read the rest of the verse, and we will begin with the interpretation. So, by talking openly with this woman, Jesus crossed a number of barriers which normally would have separated a Jewish teacher from such a person as this woman of Samaria. Jesus did 3 things that were highly unconventional and astonishing for his cultural religious situation. 1. He as a man discussed theology openly with a woman. 2. He as a Jew asked to drink from the ritually unclean bucket of a Samaritan. 3. He did not avoid her, even though he knew her marital record of having had 5 former husbands and now living with a man who was not her husband. The disciples showed their astonishment upon their return to the well. They were marveling that he was talking to a woman. A man in the Jewish world did not normally talk with a woman in public, not even with his own wife. For a rabbi to discuss theology with a woman was even more unconventional. So basically, in summary, Jesus has broken not only class boundaries between rich and poor, not only has he broken racial boundaries between Jews and Samaritans and Gentile, Goyim, he's also breaking the boundary between man and woman. So what the rest of this passage is basically explaining is that Jesus is not looking at this woman simply as a woman. and it's kind of trying to defer to, well, he wasn't just explicitly talking to her because she was a woman. He was seeing her as a person. But is that not also a refrain of feminism, that let's just see people as people, right? Let's just not see everyone is equal. That, again, is a feminist proposition. Like, that's not patriarchy at all. That's not based. Men and women are biologically different. We occupy different castes and with different roles in society. Jesus comes and ignores those roles and just sees this woman as a person. And that is what makes Jesus a proto-primordial feminist. Let's move on. So I had also mentioned earlier that not only did Jesus either defer constantly to women and upraise their position in his movement and welcome them into his movement, and not only did he also frequently anointed by sinful women. I mean, the sin that women generally commit is adultery, and he showed them mercy and compassion that would be considered ignorant and blue-pilled according to the MGTOW and red pillars of our day. And not only also did he lash out constantly at the Pharisees and the male powers of his society, and not only were those, he called them hypocrites and whitewashed tombs, etc. And not only did he, not only did the monks who wrote and elaborated on these stories, not only did they create stories where the patriarchy was even more vicious and evil and exploitative deliberately of women, as we saw in John 8, chapter 8, but Jesus also despised the family unit as well. I'm going to read a couple of verses that prove this. So, the book of Luke, chapter 12, verses 52 through 53. For from now on, 5 in one house will be divided, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. Father will be divided against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. Let's read another verse, the book of Matthew, chapter 10, verse 36 through 38, which actually echoed the passage I just spoke, and also adds this as well. And a man's enemies will be those of his own household. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. Now, a way that I had interpreted this, and I imagine that many Christians would softly interpret this, is Jesus does not say to hate your family necessarily. He does not say to that you cannot love your family, but you have to love Jesus Christ more than them. Well, again, I'd like to refer back to the verses from the epistles of Paul that extort that the head of every man is Christ. Well, who is Christ? Who is Christ? He is the proto-feminist. And if you love a proto-feminist avatar, and if you uphold those values, the kinds of values, this breaching of caste and classes, in this general ignorance, this basically the washing away, the creation of an ignorance via overwhelming compassion for the female sex. Okay, it clouds your vision and it clouds your judgment as to how to truly navigate how to domesticate, essentially, and control the female sex from destroying society. If that is your head, if that is your spiritual head, well, do you not hate your family then? Let's move on. So I'd like to discuss one last verse. And it comes from Matthew chapter 22, verses 23 through 30. And this is when the Pharisees came to test Jesus again, and they asked him what happens essentially if a woman has had many husbands throughout her life and dies. And they ask him, who is her rightful husband in heaven? And I will read it now. The same day the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him and asked Jesus, saying, Teacher, Moses said that if a man dies, having no children, his brother shall marry his wife, and raise up her offspring for his brother. Now there were with us 7 brothers. The first died after he had married, and having no offspring, left his wife to his brother. Likewise the second also, and the rest. Last of all, the woman died also. Therefore, in the resurrection, whose wife of the 7 will she be? For they all had her. Jesus answered and said to them, You are mistaken, not knowing the Scriptures, nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given into marriage, but are like the angels of God in heaven. So, tell me, why, if Christianity is such a based and patriarchal religion that's going to save Western civilization, and that was created by our Indo-Proto-European ancestors who were nomads and invented the chariots and horse riding and conquered the ancient world in antediluvian times through the strength and power of a patrilineal heritage, these same groups that later produced the Vikings, who had the paradise of Valhalla, where a man dies and he just fights. He battles all day, and then he feasts in the halls of Valhalla all night and for the rest of eternity. How is an afterlife where everyone is asexual and androgynous more masculine than what our Indo-European ancestors had produced before? Like, if Christianity is a patriarchal religion, why does it seem to be that this ideal of spiritual ascension is losing your sexual identity and becoming androgynous? I mean, Jesus Christ says it here in the verses, here in Matthew, and he has said it in previous verses that I have cited, where, for example, he states the requirements for he changes the law that now a man cannot divorce a woman except for adultery. He changes the law, and basically makes marriage an unconscionable contract for men. He discusses how the celibacy is the preferred path toward life and toward heaven. And likewise, eventually the goal of Christianity seems to be to shed your either masculinity or femininity and to blend them in with each other. You will be resurrected in new bodies that are neither male nor female. Why would a patriarchal religion that is made for men, why would that be the end goal, to become asexual? That's honestly smacks much more of transgenderism. I could make an argument here that Jesus is advocating for a kind of proto-transgender movement. Obviously, of course, the idea of transgenderism would be completely alien to ancient peoples of 2,000 years ago. But again, this is the first process in slowly feminizing the European people over the course of 3,000 years. Okay, that's it. That is the end of my presentation. It's been almost 2 hours. I scarcely believe that anyone else is probably left listening, but if you are, please like, share, subscribe, that whole shebang, and please, again, share this with Christians of all stripes. Spread this video as the exhaustive and decisive blow to any red pill types who fervently proselytize Christianity is the solution to the problems of our day. It is not. We need a scientific, rational solution based on the biological realities between men and women. Goodbye.